All right, we get reaction now from the Black Business Council, and we're joined by Chairperson Elias Monage. Good to have you, Sam. Thank you very much for your time tonight here on In Focus. 1.5 trillion, if you look at where most of this investment is coming from, is this going to result, firstly, in economic growth, but also job creation?
Good evening, Thabo, and the viewers at home of Newzroom Afrika. I think we need then to look at this thing in a particular context where we are on a recovery path as the country and the reconstruction of the economy. As you are aware, and the listeners there know very well, that we just come from the pandemic. Now, if things were equal, it would be basically means that we'll be on a different trajectory. But given the current space where we have exceeded the pledges by 25%, which is equated to 300 million, it basically then means as a country we are gaining confidence, or there is the recovery of the confidence from the investor community. That's how we need them to look at this thing as a first thing. Secondly, we need them to say, given the current issues around electricity, despite all those factors that we are still faced with as a country on the energy crisis, also the investors, they're basically demonstrating confidence into the country because of the pledges that they've made. However, what is stand to be seen in the next coming period is the execution of those pledges. We need them to see the implementation, where we now start to see the investment being injected in the economy. No longer pledges. Now we convert the pledges into concrete employment, concrete investments in various sectors of the economy, where we then need them to see transfer of skills, knowledge, and not only that, but also how then do we bring the previously disadvantaged individuals as part of the inclusive economy. Yeah. And that must also include the small, medium enterprises being graduated into a bigger scheme of things, where they are not remaining as small, medium enterprises. But that part of the graduation, it then means they can then transact and trade with bigger companies where they've been lifted. And hence I'm talking about graduating, so that they don't remain as small, medium enterprises forever and ever, so that they basically then clear and then bring other people on board. Yeah. I might then call that the lifting model, so that the big boys and girls in town that they run big corporates, by virtue of the investments, they need them to look at the entire supply chain, where you then also then bring the professionals on board, you then bring small, medium companies on board, but again, they need them to move up the ladder, so that that trajectory of growth and investments being embedded is then being seen as bringing other people that historically they're not part of the trade and environment. So these are some of the issues that I think we're then looking at.
Yeah. Well, one of the stakeholders with you at NADLEC, which is Labour, raised this issue with us on Thursday to say that when they look at this investment, it promotes concentration more than it does transformation. So players that were already pretty much in the game have expanded their footprint. So there's a concentration of power in those companies and their influence in the economy more than it is bringing in SMMEs and black SMMEs for that matter. Do you share that sentiment?
I don't think so. We need them to look at this thing again within a particular context, because if we then talk about the monopoly, there are various legislation that deals with a monopoly in terms of the Competition Commission or the Competition Commission Act that deals with a concentration and monopoly, to say to what extent then do you allow other companies then to continue monopolizing. So those are some of the issues that I'm saying we need them to look at. That's first. Secondly, remember, if, for example, you then look at in the ICT space, and I'm not going to mention any company. In the ICT space, there are a number of companies that they're looking at digital economy. And when you don't talk about digital economy, you then talk about access to various things where people, they need them to have access to communication, access to trade, and access to education. So service providers might be many or might be big corporates, but need them to allow small, medium enterprises then to look at their various things. For example, you might then have a big corporate providing Wi-Fi, but the hardware and other things, including even the installation, might then be given to small, medium enterprises. Now, when we then look at that, again, is the entire supply chain, so that the domination should not be the big corporates in that aspect, so that we then bring professionals to do the installations and other people that historically were outside the norm of that specific industry and sector. The second part, again, we need them to look at the question of training and transfer of skills and knowledge, because you need them to impart. I mean, the big companies, they need also them to impart those knowledge and skills to the young emerging companies and individuals, so that again the skill set is not being lost as part of the migration from where people they were a few years ago to the bigger things. The other part, again, if we want them to look at various things, for example, we need them to start relooking at regional investments to say, this conference, for example, there are certain investments that are done in Mpumalanga, not done in Gauteng, and others that are done in Northern Cape, some that are done in KZN. So you then have a widespread of investments, or what I would call a plethora of investments that they vary from one province to another province. Yes, of course, we still need them to look at specialization, because if we then look at the outlook of the province or regions, they're not the same. I mean, Northern Cape is known by its mining and even the sun. So it then means we need them to relook at what is then better placed or better required for that province compared to Limpopo, compared to Mpumalanga. Again, Mpumalanga is predominantly what I would call a coal city. How can again utilize that? You look also another area, whether in Limpopo, that the eastern part of Limpopo, which is still port, is predominantly mining town. So again, how do you relook at various investments in those areas, and including the skills, and including even the academic and training institution in those specific areas? Hence, the point that I'm raising is that in as much as investments are done at one point at the conference, but we need them to look at the spread, we need them to look at the requirements in various areas to say to what areas we then need to look at specialization in those areas, including even academic institution and vocational training, so that we don't lose those skill sets in those specific areas. Those are some of the things that I'm saying. It will then require a specific focus and direction to say, how then do we deal with the execution of these investments in various provinces? And not only that, but we need also then to relook at the region, SADC. We need them to look at the continent, because, for example, again, if we were to talk about copper comes from Zambia and DRC. How then do we start to relook at investments within the region and outside the SADC region, so that we still have that specialization and the movement of people, including even commodities from A to B? That becomes an area for beneficiation, so that as a continent, we still remain being productive, we still remain at the hardcore of industrialization. So these are some of the issues that we need them to look at. Again, we recall that one of the things that we need also then consider is the Africa Free Continental Agreement at the hard core of the investments that are taking place in the country and outside the country, so that we don't lose that opportunity for industrialization and commerce and trade within the continent.
So while we sit with mining a little bit, the Energy Minister, Monage, raising a concern, for example, around not seeing enough SMEs pursuing explorations in the country, saying, I've invited them, but they're just not coming forth. What would you think would be a challenge there in the context of the fact that a lot of the investments that were coming forth come from big corporates, barring, of course, one or two black-owned businesses that really did show up there, which means there needs to be more done towards that?
Remember, I think, Thabo, one of the things that I think we've raised and we continue raising is the access to funding. And I think because if we then do exploration in mining, it then requires deep pockets. So you cannot just rock up and say, I'm going to do this thing. Exploration, it takes longer in terms of the returns of the investment. And therefore, it then requires a special funding to be set aside so that people that small, medium enterprises or companies and individuals that they see a benefit and they want them to participate in that area, they should be supported and have funding available. So that's one of the areas that I'm saying we have a limitation. The constraints is the funding, access to funding. That's one thing. Secondly, again, if we then talk about specialization, it then means the bigger mining houses, they need then either as part of their enterprise development and corporate social responsibility to set aside maybe a fund so that you then encourage the participation of emerging young miners and professionals. Then when they do exploration, they're not hamstrung in terms of funding to that effect. That's one thing. The third part again is around the transfer of skills and knowledge, so that we need to have that a situation where there is that transfer of the skills and knowledge, so that at least professionals and young emerging companies, they can then tap those skills for that specific requirements in an event where they see a need then to do that thing. The last part, I think, is around how then do we forge a greater collaboration between those big corporates and small, medium enterprises and professionals, so that we don't miss and lose that opportunity where we then bring a category or a class of individuals and companies that they are keen and willing then to do exploration. So these are some of the things that we need them to look at. And yes, I mean, the point that the state president mentioned, it's not an easy thing in terms of this trajectory that we've just attained or achieved in terms of the 1.2 trillion. And then again, even setting aside for the next coming 5 years, 2 trillion, again, it then requires a number of organizations and institutions then to reflect so that the next batch of the investments must then include, it must be a conscious decision that we are going to include number of individuals and companies that historically were not part of the first the batch of the pledges and investments that will take course in the next coming period. So these are some of the things that, again, still remains a challenge. But again, we need not to lose hope and then continue to relook at how can we configure and do this thing proper, efficiently and effectively within the context of that recovery and the reconstruction of the current economic setup.
Mr. Monage, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. So that is Elias Monage of the Black Business Council.